Are we, YouTubers, the best astrophotographs? Are we the ones with the most skills, the best equipment, the best processing skills? No, we're not. We are just the loudest. We are like the schoolboys in the first row who always hold their hand and shout out the answers. But these are not the ones who know the most. The ones who know the most, they sit in the last row. Quiet, self-confident, that they know what is needed, and even more. And that's enough for them. In this new series, I want to shine a spotlight on them. The great talents, the great artists, the ones who work with great diligence, passion, and patience, who fully dedicate their time to produce the best pictures possible. Without much ado, post them on Astrobin and amaze us and inspire us with their work, with their pictures. And today, as the premiere, it's a pleasure and an honor to introduce you to Kevin Morefield, an astrophotographer from Portland, Oregon, who achieved until now 28 pictures of the day on Astrobin. And this here is his latest picture. Join me now in welcoming Kevin Morefield. Hi, Kevin.
Hey,
So thanks a lot that you do that. Absolutely great.
sure, my pleasure.
Kevin, can you tell me something about the background of you and how you actually got into astrophotography?
Sure. Well, my father had telescopes when I was a kid, and his prized Unitron 60 millimeter refractor, he allowed me to use by myself when I was about 13. So that goes back to the 1970s. I actually have a photograph that I took in 1977, I think, which was my first astrophotograph. We won't show it today. Uh, anyway, in high school, I thought I was going to be an astronomer. That didn't happen, but I did go to college to be a photographer. I didn't like my job prospects, so I worked in the finance industry and marketing for 30 some years, and then retired so that I could do this pretty much full time.
So what excites you most about astrophotography?
Well, having done visual astronomy for a long time, it was always sort of a letdown for me. I know it's not for everyone, but for me, it was. I wanted to see something that looked like the pictures I saw in sky and telescope and whatnot. And in preparing for the 2015 eclipse, I got a telephoto lens and a nice camera. And the first thing I did was went out and took a picture of the moon and was like, wow, I can see so much. Oh, my goodness. And even before we got to the eclipse, I had started doing some deep sky night stuff. Anyway, that seeing it in the way I imagined it and feeling a discovery, actually. It's a discovery for me, even if it's not a discovery for the world. Those are the things that really excite me whenever I see an image or data coming in every day.
So what type of objects you enjoy photographing the most?
Yeah. Well, there are three different categories, I would say. One is things I do with my, DSLRs and regular cameras, things like shooting the solar eclipses. I'm trying to see all of those now around the world if I can. And I do some Milky Way stuff as well, and landscape type things, or nightscapes, I should call it. But I also do wide field, and I do that from the backyard, and those are going to be nebula, large star clusters maybe, and of course some of the biggest galaxies. And then there are the deep sky things. I think the big galaxies I shoot at long focal length. They're maybe the thing that really excite me lately. Things like oh gosh, well, there's so many down in the southern hemisphere now that I'm down there. 253 was the first one I shot, and it's just amazing.
When you say you travel to eclipses, ever happened that you traveled a long way to an eclipse and then it was just clouds there?
Well, I was 5 for 5 and got very lucky because twice on second contact, the clouds just dissipated right as it was starting. So lucky. But we went to Antarctica last December, and we were definitely clouded out, as were all 11 ships that attempted to see it. So it's happened once.
So can you share some of your favorite astrophotographs and why you like them?
Yeah, the first one we should probably talk about is one I just mentioned, which is NGC 253, This was the first light image with my new CDK-17 down in Chile. I was absolutely blown away with the resolution, because not only is the seeing the best in the world there, this telescope just was really well dialed in, and my full width half maxes were coming in at close to 1 arc second. So this is a good example of the deep sky large galaxies that I like so much. So another favorite is NGC 5566, and this is a galaxy group that features a couple of bright stars. And if rotated correctly, they sort of all line up, and they make for a really nice composition. So the objects were interesting to me, but the composition was almost more interesting to me with this one. The North American nebula shot, although I didn't call it that, I actually called it the mushroom cloud, was another one. And I was really happy with this because I took it in the backyard. I live in the middle of the city in Portland, Oregon, and was still able to get some detail in narrowband out of the cloud, the dark area that usually everyone ignores with this photograph. Everyone gets so interested in showing North America. I was more interested in what would be, I guess, the ocean or something. So I tried not to clip it, but to bring detail to it. And by rotating it, most people don't even know what this is. It looks like a completely new thing, even though it's one of the most photographed objects. So that's a goal of mine, to try and present things differently, but still true to the object. Another one that I really enjoyed was the Cygnus Loop. This was also shot in my backyard in the city. It is a mosaic of 2 images because it's so large. But what I really liked is I was able to capture multiple colors, not just 2 or even 3, but you'll see in there oranges, yellows, occasionally a green, but the magentas that really outline it in a very wispy way was what interested me. And this, of course, is an SHO image with RGB stars. It showed you can do a lot from the city. And then maybe the last one, which is completely different, is one I shot of Neowise over Mount Hood. This is special to me in part because of the experience. And that's a lot of astrophotography is about the experience of taking the picture and the result. We hadn't seen this comet yet because here in the northern latitudes, we were some of the first to see it when it finally, came from around the sun. And so we just had an idea to go to this high mountain that looked down over Mount Hood, this volcano we have. And we picked a spot. Turned out there was one other photographer there. We woke up at 2:30 in the morning and looked out, and there it was, just right over this mountain. So it was a magical experience, as well as, I think, a really good picture.
In your first picture, you mentioned you took it in Chile with this CDK-17. Now, that's not really a telescope you put in your suitcase. So how do we have to imagine that?
Yes, well, the CDK-17 is actually there's actually a very large mount, but there's 2 telescopes on it. One is not yet operational, and that's a Delta Rho 14-inch. I would guess it all weighs about 1,000 pounds or maybe, 500 kilos, something like that. It all had to be shipped down to Chile. I brought a bunch of things in my bag. I went down there and with the help of all the guys at the observatory, we assembled it all. I was up on the mountain about 5 nights, and there was considerable work to be done after that still. But it was a great experience. I never did leave the mountain and never got bored for a minute.
Sounds incredible.
Yes.
So we know now about CDK-17. So what other equipment are you actually using?
Yeah, well, in the backyard, I use a Takahashi FSQ 106, which is a 4-inch refractor. It's a very nice one, but the same size of equipment that many people have access to. With that, I use a Paramount MIT for the mount, and then the camera is a QHY 600. So it's a full frame camera to get the maximum wide field. Otherwise, when I'm shooting things like eclipses and maybe the Milky Way, I'm using a Sony camera. It's the A7R4. It's not been modified. I'd like to get it modified, but I haven't done so yet. And with that, I have a couple of lenses I use for the night sky that are quite fast. I have an f1.8 Sigma at 14 millimeters. And then I have a 35 millimeter focal length at f1.2. That really brings the light in to shoot these nightscapes.
So can you walk us through your planning process when you plan a night of astrophotography?
Yeah, when I shoot locally and we go out to the dark site that's a couple of hours from town, well, there really isn't much of a plan. It's more of a social event. We all get together. You ask everyone, hey, what are you shooting? I have no idea. But with the deep sky stuff that I shoot from Chile, it's a very long thought out plan, but one that's also not thought out much at all, in that I load maybe 40 or 50 targets that I want to shoot over the next year. And I put in certain parameters, such as I want to only shoot it over 40 degrees. I want to shoot the luminance over 50 degrees altitude in the sky. Give me these filters, but only these nights, this sort of thing. And the software actually puts it all together and decides what's the best object to shoot right now. And it decides that every hour throughout the night. So the idea is to shoot each object in its parts when it's most optimal to do so, and be patient. Because sometimes it may be weeks where nothing is finished, but 7 things are being shot. Patience is key. Now that software is a custom piece of software a friend of mine made, but Voyager Advanced as well as Nina both will do the same sort of thing. So those are also good options.
And how do you approach the composition of the photos you're doing?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that, because I've noticed there seem to be 2 camps in the astrophotography. Those that care deeply about composition and those that really don't care about it at all. It's I put in the center of the object, I take the picture, I process it in full frame, and there it is. And these are 2 different schools of thought. One is I want to represent and document the object. It's more of a scientific approach. And they want to do probably very little in terms of processing, or at least as little as possible. The other extreme is more of the artistic approach, and they're going to do everything they can to make it the picture that they have in their mind. Sort of use the data as a paintbrush. Now, everyone falls on some spectrum, usually in between there, but the one dividing factor that I've found is the use of a rotator. I couldn't dream of not having a rotator on my telescope, because every image, when I compose it, I pre-compose it when I put it into the database. So I'm looking at sky surveys with an orientation of my FOV. I'm rotating it by a degree or even 2, and then moving things around to see where I want it. And then after I get the first images, I look at them and say, oh, well, does it look like I imagined it, or do I need to move it a little bit up, down, or whatever? So the composition, as I think about it, comes from my training as a photographer really in college. So I'm looking at things like, the rule of thirds as a consideration. Do I want to put the object in the center, or should it be maybe on one of the 1/3 corners? I think about visual weight. Visual weight to me is, I want the picture to be balanced. I don't want all dark on one side and all light on the other. Now, sometimes maybe the object can go on one side, but I can use stars or very bright stars to balance that weight on the other side. It's probably helpful to look at a few photographs and kind of talk about those in this regard. So let's take a look at my M92 globular cluster. Globular clusters are obviously round, and so you tend to put them in the middle, and a lot of times that's the right thing to do. But I took a look at this one, and I saw that there are some bright stars that sort of form a bit of a line. Just to the left is how I did it. I decided to orient that at an angle so that the eye flow is coming from the upper left, which our eyes tend to go upper left. Maybe it's because we read left to right. At least in Europe and America we do. Anyway, those bright stars got gradually dimmer as they went toward the center where the globular cluster was. So I moved the globular a little bit off to the side and oriented the stars up and to the left so that your eye flow went right to the object. And I thought it made a bit more interesting way to look at a globular than straight on, where your eye gets bored of looking straight ahead. Another example, I mentioned the rule of thirds. Rule of thirds is a way in photography to divide the picture into thirds in each direction, and you wind up with 4 cross points. That can be a really good place to put your point of interest. So with this image of the crescent and the soap bubble, I had, the crescent and the soap bubble, but the crescent is really the key here. I had that available to me, but also I had a very bright part of the nebulosity in Cygnus. So I chose to put the crescent in the lower left in this image, right on one of the third points. And then I had the bright part of the nebulosity cascading down, again from the upper left in this case, and sort of wrapping around the crescent to sort of bring the eye again from the upper left and down to my object. And so it allows you to see kind of more of the image and then get focused right in on what I want you to focus on, which is the crescent in this case. We should always learn from our mistakes, and mistakes happen in composition as well. So the one I'm looking at now is M86 NGC 4438. It's a portion of Markarian's chain kind of close up. But what I did, and what the mistake here is that I arranged everything in sort of a circle around the edges of the image, leaving this blank negative space right in the middle. It's a terribly boring composition, and your eye never knows where to look. You just kind of dart around. Nothing's leading me to any of these objects, even though I thought 4438 in this image looks great. I was so focused on that I really ignored my composition. So a lesson learned there.
I think that is extremely inspiring what you just told us. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaway from this interview for me, because I think that's often neglected. We just, oh yeah, this object, we put it in the middle and that's it. And so that's really something in the future. I will, for each object I will shoot, I will actually consider that, think about you and consider how I really want to compose it. So thanks a lot. What of software you use for the processing?
Yeah, this has become simpler, I would say, in recent years and even months. PixInsight is my primary software. The new weighted batch preprocessing process is so complete and easy to use now that you just load your lights, darks, and flats, or in my case, I keep a library of flats and darks, push a button, and out come your channel masters. From there, I also use Russell Croman's RC Astro tools, Blur Exterminator, Star Exterminator, even Gradient Exterminator in Photoshop, and Noise Exterminator. They're really easy to use tools. There's a little bit of controversy with AI tools. I don't have a problem with it. I do find that I have to back off quite a bit with his defaulted settings in order to keep from producing artifacts. But it's a much simplified way to get quickly to a good result. After that, though, I usually combine everything into an RGB or an LRGB image. I take that to nonlinear, and then I go to Photoshop because I really like using layers in Photoshop. It allows me to fine-tune things like curves and color balances to just the way I like them with good feedback.
So with all your experience, what advice would you give to other astrophotographers to improve, some tips, some tricks?
Yeah. Well, the first one and the most important one is to find a group of people that are doing this and learn from each other. Most cities have got astronomical groups or societies, and I've found that they usually have imaging subgroups where you'll find people that are much like you or more advanced or less advanced, and you can learn from each other. In the case of our group here in Portland, there's even a way to check out telescopes and equipment before you buy and use it. This is just invaluable. I learned mostly from trial and error in the beginning, and it was so slow. I love mentoring people to try and take them, what took me a year, they can learn in 2 weeks by simply being, told a few things. So I don't have a specific tip or trick other than, find your group and be part of it. Now, there's no tip or trick to this, but you need a lot of repetitions. You need a lot of cycles to learn. Simply going out on the few clear, dark moon nights where you can drive 2 hours away is only going to get you a few nights a year. So using narrowband in your backyard, if you have a backyard, is the easiest way to get a lot of repetitions with the equipment, with the processing, and learn as much as you can quickly that way.
What do you think sets your astrophotography apart from what others do?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is, let's be honest, I have some of the best equipment. It's located in one of the best locations on Earth. And because I've retired to do this, I have massive amounts of time. So shame on me if I don't have really good pictures. But I think in terms of me personally, though, it's really just I pay attention to composition. I think like a photographer first, and like an astronomer, I guess, or astrophotographer second. And I'm really addicted to resolution, and meaning high resolution. And that's why I have a large equipment in Chile, because you know, as I've learned all along, you break one barrier, you know, maybe you learn how to guide well, and suddenly you're limited by the size of your equipment. You get larger equipment, and you discover you're limited by your seeing. Now you need better seeing, and you get better seeing, and you just simply work your way through each step as you break barriers to improve.
So of all the pictures that you have taken,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most memorable?
Well, again, the most memorable has more to do with the circumstance than the image for me again. And it is an image of the eclipse from Svalbard in 2015 that I took. This is right at the beginning of my journey into astrophotography, but it was our family vacation was to go 800 miles from the North Pole in March to see this eclipse for 2 minutes. And it was glorious, such a success. There hadn't been a clear sky in 30 days when we landed on Svalbard, which I wasn't aware that was a possibility. But the morning of the eclipse, the temperature dropped to -10 Fahrenheit, -23 C. The skies cleared, and we had this glorious eclipse that occurred only 11 degrees off the horizon. And what that meant was that we had an entire 6-hour sunrise and 6-hour sunset that all occurred on pink snow, you know, with what looks like twilight, you know, it was absolutely beautiful. So the image actually is an image of the eclipse progression from the first partial phase to totality. And that totality image that's part of this progression image is actually one of my favorites. And it was picked by Sky and Telescope to be the cover image for their special issue for the 2017 eclipse, which was so well observed here in the US. So that made it very special for me.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you.
So tell us about something you have not yet tackled yet, but next big thing.
Well, there are a lot of things. You know, I thought about doing an O3 sky survey because I had started shooting O3 on galaxies some time back and realizing that at least with the ones that are relatively close, and I learned that they need to be close, the galaxies, because of redshift. If the galaxy is too far away, the O3 and the HA are so shifted they're outside of your filter. So the ones that are, say, within 50 million light years, I would see a lot of O3 activity and hadn't seen that before. And I thought, well, I wonder, I mean, you know, what else is out there in the sky? Because we shoot hydrogen alpha a lot across the sky, but not as much with the O3. Anyway, I've been trying to get a dark sky wide field setup for some time, which I'm still just about there, but not there yet. And others have already taken this up, so I think I'm a bit late to that part. I may try it anyway. But what I do want to do with the wide field setup in DarkSight is to shoot the Orion constellation in a very high resolution, somewhere below 2 arc seconds, full width half max, the whole thing. I haven't got a clue what I'll be able to do with it because we'll be talking about multiple gigapixel image. So unless I put it on in full resolution on my wall, the entire wall, you know, it'll be pointless, but I'll really like it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Looking forward to see that. So let's stay for the last question in the future. So where do you believe that astrophotography will go in the future?
So I started this in 2014, which is 9 years ago now. And the changes that we've seen in the last 9 years, we can probably extrapolate forward a bit to see where things are going. You know, when I started, cameras were CCD, and now we have mostly CMOS, and that has changed things pretty dramatically. You know, the pixels have gone from 9 microns to 3.76. That's had a huge impact on the size of the telescope equipment that you need, because now you can use a 4 or 5 inch refractor with 500 to 1,000 millimeters to get the same resolution you used to need 2,000 to 3,000 millimeter focal lengths for. Quantum efficiencies have increased. Read noise has decreased by a factor of something like 5. You know, we've got software that used to be really expensive is now free. You know, Nina takes the place of software that cost thousands of dollars in the past. Cameras that used to cost $15,000, you can now get equivalent for $5,000. You know, ZWO themselves has had a huge impact. And what that's done is brought thousands of new people into this, new and younger people, I would say. When I first started out, I was, in my early 50s, and I was the young guy. And now the young guys are, they're in their 20s because they can afford, to get into this now. So what's going to happen, in the next 10 years? Well, one of the biggest impacts is we're going to see so many more people come in, because I think we're going to continue seeing cheaper equipment, not just because of the scale. It's not going to be that the same camera gets cheaper. It's that we're not going to need as good of equipment. Possible reasons for that, as the read noise gets lower and lower, we can take more and more shorter exposures. So things like live stacking, maybe live stacking in camera, start to become a solution where now I don't need a guide. I don't need a $7,000 mount. I can use a tracker, and some of these new strain drives might be the solution. Yes, there are some issues with periodic error, but with shorter exposures, that's okay. They'll get stacked out. So if that continues to take things down from where the $25,000 setup of 10 years ago is a $5,000 setup now, maybe it's a $2,000 setup in the next 5 or 10 years. Well, we're not going to have millions of people doing this, because there are millions of people around the world that would love to do it. I think the software will also keep making things simpler. Could we get AI software moved from processing into capture? I don't see why not. It's going to simplify all of these controls into sliders, do a little more of this and a little less of that. Let the AI think about it. That's perfectly okay, right? We always get a little upset about, AI making things simpler. Well, we're not doing it anymore. But I mean, if you've ever taken a picture with a DSLR, you're using lots of tools. Raw is not raw. That camera is doing so much for you. And why not have that same thing happen in astrophotography? So, I think we're going to see massive changes. I think we're going to see massive growth in the hobby. And that means quality is going to improve too. We saw something like this 10 to 15 years ago as film cameras gave way, to digital cameras. And the process of buying film and developing it, and the limitation of taking one roll of film and having it cost you $20, it disappeared. And so the same sort of thing, I think, is probably what we'll see in the next 10 years.
Cool. Sounds exciting.
It is. It's a good time to be in it.
Absolutely. So that was talking about exciting. This was really exciting. All the information you could give us. Wish you much luck, much success in the future with your hobby. And thanks for sharing.
All right. My pleasure.